Good morning, everybody. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. And today, we're going to talk about Kerry Thornley. Again, he has re-entered the conversation. So, Kerry Thornley. I'll give you the short version in a nutshell. Official stories says he knew Oswald in the Marines, which he did, but only for like 2.5 months. Maybe that. And allegedly, while he's in Atsugi, he finds out that Oswald has defected to the Soviet Union. So he had begun a novel, I guess you could call it that, called The Idle Warriors, about what do Marines trained to kill do in peacetime, right? Or when there's nothing going on. The Idle Warriors, get it? Allegedly, when he hears about Oswald, he repurposes the book to make it about a Marine who defects to the Soviet Union. So from what we've been led to understand, this book was finished around 1962. He'd been working on it for years. But apparently, an original draft of this was done in 1960. By the time he got out of the Marine Corps at the end of 1960, it was done. Didn't have much to do with Oswald. So I found an article in reference to that. The Idle Warriors starts local tour. This is from, I didn't clip the date like an idiot, but this is from 1960, late 1960. I'd say November, probably. The Idle Warriors, a monologue about wild antics of peacetime Marines in Japan, starts its Southern California tour this Friday at the La Habra Women's Club. Ex-Marine Kerry Thornley tells a story based on his recent Far East tour with the Corps. Awards won by Thornley over the past 4 years include, and these will be important, first place in the 10th Junior Chamber of Commerce Voice of Democracy contest, CIA, club finalist in the 1957 Lions contest, 3 Whittier Union High School District Forensic Ribbons, and regional first place in the Marine Corps Technique of Instruction competition in 1959, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but there's really no information on it. And so I want to talk initially about Kerry Thornley's background, because the Kerry Thornley we've come to know is a lunatic who pushes Discordianism, which is a nonsensical, worldview, philosophy. I just call it a CIA COINTELPRO organization. So when I look at who gets recruited by the CIA, I don't know about anything going on today. Who the hell knows? But back in the day, where would they pluck people from? Various colleges, Ivy League schools, but also from high schools. And Kerry Thornley is like the perfect kid for them to want to recruit. He's obviously a go-getter. The Kerry Thornley we've come to know is a dirty beatnik with dirty fingernails, right? Well, in high school, that's not who he was. In high school, he was I don't have his grades, but I'm sure he was a straight A student. His proficiency scores in the Marine Corps are through the roof. He's the kind of guy who's a sharp kid who the CIA would want to recruit right out of high school, which is exactly what they did, I'm convinced. So Kerry Thornley, he was one of those kids who entered all kinds of contests. He won a speech contest winner, the Voice of Democracy contest winner for 1956. Do I have a date on here anywhere? Because he joined the Marines. Oh, let me take a look at this thing here. He joined the Marines May 28th of 1956. I have a feeling that he was recruited because of his overachieverness in high school. The guy seemed to join every competition he could join in high school. Shows he's a go-getter, right? Definitely a smart guy. He wrote his speech on, let me see if it says here. No. What democracy means to me or something like that. One of those typical assignments you'd get in high school. But we have another article here. Everything this guy did made it into the papers, at least in Whittier, California. Local Marine in speech finals. Having won 3 preliminary speaking contests, Marine Corps Kerry Thornley, son of Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Thornley of 15608 Starbuck. Love how back in the day they just throw your address out there. Will be flown from his base in Natsuki, Japan to Washington, D.C. for the finals in Techniques of Instruction contest, September 27th. Thornley was a 57 graduate of California High School, where he won the Voice of Democracy contest. After competing in the finals in Washington, the young Marine will visit with his family in Whittier. So, Kerry Thornley wins the... This is I don't know what to think of this. This is the Techniques of Instruction competition in the military. But the funny thing is, when you look at Kerry Thornley's record, the flying of him from El Toro to Washington, D.C. happened... Well, he arrived at temporary duty, Washington, D.C. Tech Instruction. So prior to that, the last thing he'd been assigned was July 4th, 59. Coming from MACS 9, which is the lighter than air base adjacent to El Toro at Santa Ana. He gets into MACS 9. Let me see, he's transferred on March the 19th, and he's out of there by July 4th. So he knows Oswald for roughly 3 months, give or take. But then Oswald defects to the Soviet Union, right? So Oswald gets out. Here's the thing with Oswald getting out of the Marines. It was pretty obvious, and it had to have been obvious to everybody, that what he was saying he needed the discharge for was not what he really needed the discharge for. And while that may seem obvious, it was super obvious, because when you go back, you look, he started to apply. He applied for the Albert Schweitzer College back in like March, right? So that's like 6 months. So he knew the plan, right? And there's a lot of indication in the documentation that they're acknowledging that, to me, indicates the whole thing was just a wash. The idea that he went and got his passport the day before he's leaving, he basically put on inactive duty, which was September the 11th of 59. It seemed as though he was signaling this was happening, right? And obviously the people who signed off it knew about it, and Fred Korth was involved in all this. But Kerry Thornley's only with him for a couple months, and then he gets sent to MACS 1, where it's Oswald's old unit. And he's an AVN electric operator, just like Oswald was. He gets there July 4th, and then he's flown back to Washington, D.C. 3 days after Oswald leaves the Marines. Kerry Thornley will later state that he heard about Oswald defection in October of 59 while he was in Atsugi. But guess what? He wasn't in Atsugi at all. He was not in Atsugi at the time. He was in Washington, D.C. from September the 14th through the 29th of October. I don't know if that includes his leave. There's actually there was another notation here, but it was crossed off. It's just for semi-annual. But it appears as though he's transferred back to MACS 1 in January 31st. So he had a couple months. I don't know if he was on leave until January 31st, but it appears as though from the 14th of September 59 to the 29th of October 59, he was in Washington, D.C. for training and instruction. You'd think they'd put him on something else, because obviously, and we'll talk about him being at Keesler, which they obviously covered up, and put everyone at Keesler at Marine Battalion Headquarters, Washington, which is Arlington. I don't know why they would do that. But it appears as though he's got months and months off at a time when Oswald is allegedly just defected to the Soviet Union. So he didn't find out about anything in October in Atsugi because he wasn't there. He wasn't back in Atsugi till January 31st. Eventually, he'll be transferred to a training unit. Let's see if I can find this. Eventually, he'll be assigned to a training unit at MABS 11, MAG 11. That's still out in Japan, and he's a training assistant. He's not, and this is another thing that kind of weirds me out. In June 19th of 60, as he's preparing to leave the Marines, they're sending him to more schools. Duty instruction, ABC school. I don't know what that is. Then he's transferred again, and he's a training assistant. Now he's a training assistant at Atsugi. Eventually, he'll be transferred back to Santa Ana, where when they process you out, they put you on paper at Marine headquarters, right? Because that's where they handle the paperwork. But he transfers back in August, but in June he's going to new schools, and he's transferring out in August. So I'm going to hop back to the beginning of Kerry Thornley's record, because the thing I didn't even remember to talk about is that Kerry Thornley claims that he was only in the Marines for like a year and a half, 2 years, didn't do much. Let me read this from the Warren Commission testimony. Mr. Jenner asks, when did you first become acquainted with him? Talking about Oswald. Says it was either Easter of 59 or shortly before or after. Let's see, he was in the Marines at that time? Yes, sir, he was. I take it you were there also? Yes, sir. How long had you been in the Marines? At the time, I'd been in the Marines over half a year. I'd been in the reserves for many years. I'd been on active duty for half a year. Well, I have a problem with that because we have some major conflicts. Possibly not with his high schooling, because I don't know how it was then, but by the time I got to my senior year, I only had like two classes and a study hall left, really. I was done with school by like noon every day. So I don't know how they handled him being available to do military stuff, but his record starts on May the 28th of 1956 when he's a junior in high school, right? That's the end of his junior year, May 28, 56. And then he immediately goes to San Diego, MCRD, 1st Training Battalion, on June 11th of 56. And he's in recruit training, and then combat training, all the way through the 31st of August. Now, this would make it seem as though he's ready to go back to school, right? He did his summer in the Marines, did his basic training, and then September 56, you'd assume he's going back to high school to finish his senior year, but that does not appear to be what happened. So I'm going to have to check and see what is going on here, because September 56, he's transferred from active duty for training basic AAA man, and he's at the 8th Battery U.S. Marine Corps in Pico, California is where he's registered. Now, I don't know what that means, because we've already seen they can have you stationed at one place but being somewhere else, and we'll see that coming up with Kerry Thornley at Keesler. So August 31st, 56, looks like training. September 1st, 56, from active duty for training basic AAA man. The next entry we have here is still at Pico, California, 31st of January, 1957, semi-annual, and it has a stamp basic AAA man. AAA, from what I've gathered, is amphibious assault something, okay? I couldn't find it anywhere, but then I found an article that talked about Kerry Thornley storming the beaches in an amphibian assault unit. And so, yeah, he was definitely trained as an amphibian assault guy. But we have him here from active duty for training basic AAA man, September 1st, 56. The next entry we have is a semi-annual review, January 31st of 57. And then he's at, again, the 5th AW Battery U.S. Marine Corps, Pico, California, July 31st of 57. So July 31st of 57, he would have graduated high school already, okay? However, the problem is that Kerry Thornley indicates that he didn't do anything really prior to October 1st or October 20th of 58. So it says here from the Department of Defense files on Kerry Thornley. It says, from translation of Thornley's file by DOD, pertinent part of the file only. So the DOD had a file on Kerry Thornley. Prior to 10/20/58, Thornley on reserve. As of this date, attached to subordinate unit of Marine Wing headquarters. Can't read that part, it's smudged. And then it says, on March 18th, 1959, he transferred to MACS 9 at El Toro, California. In June 59, became aviation draft replacement trainee. for which the standing operating procedure required transfer overseas. He was then transferred to MACS 1, MAG 11, 1st MAC Wing on July 4th, 59. Thornley then taken leave from May 29th to July 4th as per usual. He then traveled with his group by ship to Atsugi. He returned to the United States on September 14th of 59 for temporary additional duty in Washington, D.C., at which time he received technical instruction. It doesn't mention anything about the competition in this memo. He rejoined his unit 1029-59 and remained at Atsugi at least through 2560. So let me verify that. Well, it says here October 29th, 59, but then we don't have him. That's still listed under Washington, D.C. training instruction. I don't have him back at MACS 1 until January the 31st. So I don't know if this is a misinterpretation or an intentional obfuscation of what happened. But yeah, I don't have him back there until January 31st of 60. He rejoined his unit 1029-59 and remained at Atsugi at least through 2560. Normal tour lasts 13 months, which would mean Thornley returned around August of 60. Pre-El Toro and Atsugi assignments, October 2nd, 58 to May 29, 59, Thornley with reserve unit. But that doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything. September 15th, 57 to August 15th, 58 in reserve at MACS 4, subordinate unit. But he doesn't say what he did. And he did a ton. He did basic training. He did combat training. He did amphibious assault training. And then once he graduates high school, he's stationed at the 5th Battery USMCR, Pico, California, July 31st, 57. Basic AAA man. And he's still there through the 14th of September, 57. Then it appears as though he is now stationed at MACS 18, MCR NAS, in Los Alamitos, California. Now, this is where it gets interesting because, remember, they just said that before October 20th, he was in the reserves and didn't do anything. But here, September 15th, 57, this is obviously when he ends up at Keesler Air Force Base. And he's there because it says joined, and the primary duty is retraining. So after having been in the Marines through recruit training school, combat training school, amphibious assault school, being stationed as an amphibious assault guy in late 57, now in September, up until September 57, now in September 15th, 57, he's there for retraining, and the next entry is July 31st, 58. So let's just pause right here. And I'll tell you a story. So as I'm going through these Keesler photos, so obviously what I'm looking for is we have a discrepancy in Oswald's time in the radar school. We have the picture of him with the fat neck graduating in mid-June. So that's kind of concrete, right? If that's a real photo. And then I keep finding references to Oswald being in a different school at Biloxi, right? We have Owen Dejanovic, who says he knew him at radar school. And when you go through Owen Dejanovic's record, which we'll cover today, he joined, he got to Keesler and got into the same school as Oswald, but a week later than the one that we know, right? But he says Oswald was in his class, and that's where he knew him from. But he started at Keesler 1 week afterwards, right? And this kind of coincides with the change of the course that Powers talked about in his Warren Commission testimony, right? So long story short, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is I'm digging through as many of these Keesler Air Force Base photos as I can find because I'm looking for any other photo that would have been taken at the end of December 1956 that would have had Lee Oswald's graduation from basic recruit training, right? One that wasn't listed. And I'm like, I'll never find anything just looking at these photos. But after a couple hours of looking at photos, and there's only maybe 7 or 8 from the era of 1957 in reference to Keesler. But as I'm going through them, somebody just a couple years ago had posted on some forum the photo that they were in from their graduation class of basic electronics, class 24077, class timing was B1. Remember, the A's were in the morning and the B's were in the afternoon. Graduation date just says December 57, nondescript. Kerry Thornley's next assignment isn't until the 31st of January, where after taking the Oh no, so okay. So we have basic AVN controller operator, July 31st, 58. That's a different course than this. This is the basic electronics department. So why they sent him to electronics school, I don't know. But they did. But anyway, I'm looking through these photographs, and all of a sudden, a face just jumps out at me from this class 24077, graduation date December 15th. And sure enough, this is Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley is clearly the man sitting in the front row of class 24077's graduation date of December 57. And yeah, so what does this tell us? This tells us that they used, again, the cover of, was he listed here? He wasn't listed as being at Casco HQBN HQMC. This time he's listed as being at MACS 18, which is Los Alamitos, California. The thing that's interesting about the base at Los Alamitos is that it's not necessarily a Marine base. It is a multi-wing of the military kind of cooperative base. All units will train there from all branches of the military. Whenever I see stuff like that, where you have this inter-military wing cooperation, it just screams of intelligence and CIA, period. So, Kerry Thornley clearly not where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be in California. He's not supposed to have had any real training or anything. He's just in the reserves, which is where you go to school for 2 years and you don't do anything until you hop in. But they make a real emphasis about he didn't really do anything in the Marines till October 28th. But let me complete going through his record up until then. So besides the fact that we have the photo of him starting probably September 14th, 57, transferred, and he probably gets there September 15th, 57 to Keesler. Anyone interested in the research, start Googling September 15th, 57 as a start date for Keesler basic electronic operator course. And then the next thing we have is January 31st, 58, where he's again on retraining. So now he has his 31st of July semi-annual, and he's now doing basic AVN controller operator, which I was under the impression that goes to Jacksonville. So he probably went from Keesler to Jacksonville. And then here he's an AVN electronics operator. He's still training until October 58. So which means he probably went to the basic operator course in Jacksonville and then came back to Keesler, and then he took the controller operator course, which landed him at MACS 4 by MACS 4 is at Santa Ana, and that's when he does some more testing, and then he's at MACS 9 by March 19th. And so that's where he knows Oswald, March 19th through July 4th, because by July 4th, actually way before that, probably the end of May, he probably only knows him for 2 months before he took leave. So March 18th to the 29th of May, just over 2 months he knew Oswald. But then what does he do from there? He goes to Atsugi. And now for a long time, I kind of felt like Kerry Thornley was sent places specifically to keep tabs on Oswald and understand Oswald, which I still believe. But that is not as obvious anymore when you just look at the records, because they sent mass groups of people in the same order behind each other by a couple weeks. So just looking at the schedules alone is not really a good enough reason to say that Kerry Thornley was keeping tabs on Oswald. It's just not. What is the statement from Ronald Schwinghammer, which says that Rick Thornley was asking questions about Oswald, taking pictures, keeping tabs on the whole group, kind of like documenting. And when he asked, why are you asking all these questions? He's like, oh, I'm going to write a book. And that book is The Idle Warrior, which is pretty much already done by the time he gets back from California. Right? So, moving on. I already covered his history, that he's a science nerd. He joined, he was in the science fair participant in 1957, placed third place in the Forensic League speech competition, Voice of Democracy contest winner. I mean, this guy was an academic ass kisser, right? Then we have an article from April the 28th, 1960. All right, so let's compare this to his record. April 28th, 1960, Thornley and the Marines. Marine Acting Corporal Kerry W. Thornley, son of Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Thornley, took part in a huge amphibious landing exercise, March 22nd, on Formosa's southern coast. That's Taiwan. While serving with Marine Aircraft Group 11. So, March 22nd? Where's he supposed to be March 22nd? Okay, so I have 24th of February. He's transferred. Doesn't say where he's transferred to or from. Oh, yes, it does. He goes from MACS 1 to an MABS 11, MAG 11, First MA FMF. I always forget what FMF stands for. But that obviously is him transferring for this amphibious assault. Let me see. Now, the second half of Kerry Thornley's training sheet. Let's see if we have any notes here. We have Kerry Thornley. You see, here we go. It doesn't mention anything about, his record doesn't mention anything about the amphibious assault training or the exercise that they participated in. Maybe it was top secret, but it says he was transferred February 60, MABS 11, MAG 11. I'm pretty sure that MABS 11 is still at Sugi, but he's sent there as a training assistant. Then the next entry is June of 60, and he's back to school. Duty instruction, ABC school. Doesn't say where. Then July 8th, he's transferred again to a temporary duty assignment, and he's a training assistant. So by summer of 60, he's a training assistant, but he's marked training assistant at the time he's supposed to be in that amphibious assault group. See, the point I'm making about all this is that he is way better trained of a Marine than we've ever been led to believe. By the time his record officially starts at MACS 4, right before getting to MACS 9, he's already done every damn school there is. Basic electric, basic aviation, controller operator, amphibious assault school. And don't forget, he's involved in the program which will end up leading him to winning the competition based on the instructor techniques, right? So what is going on here? To me, it's obvious that he is way more important than anyone has ever let on. He hasn't really let on to anything that he's anybody special, right? He was just in the Marines, for a couple months with Oswald, and that's pretty much all he knows. So, fascinating, huh? But if you want to find that picture of Kerry Thornley, just put in the course number and you'll find it. So next thing what I want to talk about is we're going to talk about some other records of other Marines. Because obviously Kerry Thornley was involved in all this stuff. Remember, the file of Kerry Thornley that is in Jim Garrison's collection. Oh, Jim Garrison's collection, by the way, I'd say is 90% gone. Like all we have is about 10%. There's so many things that I find more of Garrison's files in Weisberg's collection hidden in other places than I do in Garrison's files directly, which is exactly where I found this Kerry Thornley stuff. Believe it or not, the Kerry Thornley stuff and all of the records of all the people who were in the Marines with Oswald is not in a file that has anything to do with Oswald or the Kennedy assassination. It is in Jerry Hemming's FOIA'd Marine record, which is like 100-something pages, 130 pages, and then there's about 50 pages of other Marine records. The first of which is Owen Dejanovic. And I got to wonder why, because it seems as though Jerry Hemming went through all these courses in 54, 55, and 56, not in 57. So, but Owen Dejanovic said that Oswald was in his radar course at Keesler. So let's go over Owen Dejanovic's record. So we have an entry, 29th of October, 56. That's even, remember, Oswald entered in October 56, and Kerry Thornley entered like 6-7 months before that and went through training before Oswald. But Owen Dejanovic, 29th of October 56, he enlists, and October 31st of 56, he is at San Diego. So, what's 31 minus 7? It's 24. So, yes, Dejanovic is 1 week behind Oswald's entry. He entered October 31st. Oswald entered on the 24th. He then completes his basic training January 24th. Again, Oswald finished on the 18th, so he's 1 week behind Oswald. Then he's duty instructions, ICT, which is combat training. It took me a while to figure that out, considering there's 3 types of ICT training, but the type of ICT training that these guys were in was combat training. And he's at combat training, and he's not out of there until when he's transferred to Camp Pendleton, March the 4th. Again, he's a week behind Oswald. Everything he's doing is exactly the same as Oswald, and he's a week behind Oswald. He's then stationed at Jacksonville the 21st of March, which is, again, a week after Oswald. And then he is out of Jacksonville, and he starts, here we go, Casco HQBN HQMC the 12th of May, 57. Something tells me that this course on the 12th of May, 57 is the same course on Oswald's paperwork that the number was changed. Remember, Oswald's number was changed. So I have a feeling it said one thing, and they get there, and he gets changed. He has special instructions. It's like, I have a feeling that it said, hey, despite what your paperwork says, you got to show up here on this date. And so he does. Then once he's there and started the new course, then they changed the paperwork to the other course for the Oswald that's going to be in the other course. You see what I'm saying? A week later. I have a feeling that's what they did. That's why we have the change on Powers' paperwork. And remember, Powers gets murdered. I don't know if I told you this. Powers committed suicide allegedly in late 67 in Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona. And he allegedly was found, it was a suicide. He was shot in the right temple, but the gun was found in his left hand. Okay? So, I'm not even going to touch that one yet. Damn it, I'm losing my voice. But, so yes, crazy stuff going on with Daniel Powers. But I believe that the change that he talked about during his Warren Commission testimony, and the reason that it was conflicting information, is because this is where they actually made a change on the paperwork, and they needed the same group of guys to be with this first Oswald, and then Oswald's put in the other course with Owen Dejanovic. Makes perfect sense to me. What doesn't make perfect sense to me is how the fuck are they going to keep these guys apart? How are they going to guarantee that these fucking people don't bump into each other in the mess hall or something like that? This is where I have a major problem with all this. And I'm more inclined to believe that if you could show me evidence that Oswald was just somewhere else, like if Oswald is back in New Orleans with Palmer McBride in late 57, early 58, then who is over at Sugi and then Corregidor, right? Because we have the Corregidor photos. So there's something going on with the scheduling that doesn't seem to match anything else, right? But here we have Owen Dejanovic a week behind Oswald's schedule, but he says Oswald is in his course. I thought for a minute he might have just known the other Oswald who was not in his course, but that's not what was indicated at all. So after Dejanovic gets out of training, he gets out June 26th, and from there it looks like he's on leave and has to be in El Toro July 19th. Now, I have some major problems with Oswald's schedule. Let me see if I can find this on Oswald's schedule, because this really upsets me. Here it says July 19th, 57, and that Dejanovic is a replacement trainee, and he's due to land out in Japan the 12th of September, 57. Okay. The problem that I have is that on the paperwork, even the one that isn't smudged or blanked out, the very similar notation is on Oswald's sheet, but it says 9 July 57, not 19. It might say 19, but if it does, there's a bigger problem than I'm even talking about. But it says 9 July 57, which is confirmed in the Marine Diaries, because Powers and the rest of the guy had to be there on the 12th, but for some reason, the Oswald who was with Powers had to be there on the 9th, 3 days before, which is borne out by the diaries. But Oswald's not alleged to have gotten to Atsugi until the 12th of September. So it's more than a month, right? And allegedly we have him departing. Well, this is another contradiction. I don't know if he left on August the 13th, August the 15th, August the 21st from San Diego, and then the 22nd from San Francisco. I don't know. I don't know which one. But so one thing I kind of was thinking about was that I don't think they're going to have both Oswalds on the same boat. And when I looked at the discrepancy in the pay records from where Oswald was assigned, it said that Oswald didn't have to show up until he wasn't assigned to MCAS El Toro for the draft until the 17th of July. Okay, so we have two different dates of reporting to El Toro. We have the 9th of July. This is the guy who was on with Powers, and Powers played chess with him on the boat, I guess. Powers gets killed, so we don't know what we can trust of Powers. But we have a definite discrepancy here because the other Oswald reported on the 17th, which seemingly would coincide with Dejanovic, right? So whoever, the guy who showed up on the 17th, who got on a boat with Owen Dejanovic and arrived on September 12th, I don't know which one that was. I just don't. There's some shenanigans going on here. And one of the things that I'm really, really leaning towards is that one of the Oswalds got to Atsugi way before September 12th. I found an article. Let me see if I can pull up this article really quickly. This article is basically from the Pacific at the same time. And to the Philippines, Chief Warrant Officer Joseph F. Lambert. Note the name Lambert again. Where do we see Lambert again? USN and his wife are shown in their stateroom aboard the Navy's military sea transportation service, the USNS Barrett, en route to sailing for Subic Bay, Philippine Islands from San Francisco. They will arrive August 30th. Interesting. Chief Warrant Officer Lambert, who was formerly stationed at the Naval Air Training Center in Jacksonville, Florida, is being reassigned to Fighter Air Squadron 113 at Subic Bay. He's the son of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Lambert of Pine Lake, Georgia, and the rest just is rambling. But this is interesting because the USN Barrett that Oswald took to get home when he left there November 2nd, 58, this is the same boat that was leaving that arrived in Subic Bay, Philippines, August 30th. Remember what Powers said in his testimony, that it was around the beginning of August that they left, not the end of August. So if they left in the beginning of August, let's say they get there, Oswald gets there the 9th, and then Powers gets there the 12th. They get on a boat on the 17th, and they arrive August 30th. Right? That would make sense to me. Or maybe not, because, let me think. Oswald had some medical stuff he did, and this is August 30th. So what if they left at the beginning of August, just like Powers said, and it took them 3+ weeks to get there? Then the problem that we run into is that Oswald sent that postcard stamped from Hawaii on the 31st of August to the 3830 address, right? So I'm just throwing ideas out there because I'm trying to figure out Oswald's photographs in the Philippines are written on it 1957. But despite the fact he would have gotten there in December of 57, you have him there with Powers in the Strand incident, right? So we're still trying to determine which Oswald was involved in the Strand incident. Because Martin Strand, I'm convinced, was killed over this 2 Oswald stuff. And that he found out about it, told his brother, and they killed his brother too. Of course, you're never going to find any proof of that. We got all the documents there are. There's nothing. But I'm pretty convinced that that's what happened, because that's what the government does, right? So the reason all this is relevant is because we're trying to figure out how Oswald got that picture taken in the Philippines, who took the picture in the Philippines, what date in the Philippines was it, and he wrote on there Corregidor in 57, but as per what we know of Oswald's trip, there was no Corregidor in 57, not for Oswald. He gets to Subic Bay and Kubi Point, and he's there until late January, and then he's transferred to Corregidor. So that's 58. That's not 57. So you see the conflict here. So if Oswald could have gotten on a boat and arrived directly to Corregidor, he could have gone to Corregidor, transferred to Subic Point. And Strand, hold on, here's another thing. Strand was not on the boat with Oswald when he left to go to Subic Point, November the 20th. He wasn't on it. Maybe he was already there. Maybe he was there with another person he saw named Oswald, and then the other Oswald showed up. That's possible that both of them were at Subic Point and both of them were at Corregidor. Another thing is that there's some notes and some indication in Oswald's handwritten statement and statements he made to the reporter he spoke to in the Soviet Union that he had been at Okinawa. So the thing with Okinawa is that that unit, before Oswald had gone with them to the Philippines, another squad of that unit had ended up doing Okinawa and Corregidor and a whole bunch of others. So that, I'm assuming, had to have been closer to October, maybe September of 57. And therefore you have Harvey Oswald going to Corregidor and Subic Point and Okinawa and all these other places, and then coming back while the other Oswald, Lee Oswald, is in Corregidor this time, right? So I can see how we can have an overlap. And what do we have just before that? We have the shooting that Oswald shot himself. Oh, speaking of which, I have multiple documents now where it's reported that Oswald was shot in the leg. Oswald was shot in the upper arm, and Oswald was shot in the forearm. We have witnesses to all of these, I guess. So what the fuck happened with that? No idea. But I have a feeling that while Lee Oswald was shooting himself in the barracks at Sugi, Harvey Oswald is on the Pacific doing maneuvers in Corregidor and Okinawa and all these places. Why would Oswald mention he was in Okinawa in an interview if he wasn't in Okinawa? Obviously he was at some point. This had to have been in 57. So hence my theory that Oswald went directly to Corregidor, didn't stop in Atsugi first. And then you have other people who got there in September who said Oswald showed up a couple months later, when we know Oswald allegedly got there September 12th, right? So all this conflict screams to me that something else was going on here. All right, so let me go back to these military records. For Owen Dejanovic, he gets in trouble a lot. He's in the brig like 3 different times, so I don't know what his deal is. But so here, he gets assigned to the H&HS, which is the headquarters squadron, but he's out in California, probably September 57. He's probably at El Toro. But he's a plotter TACC. So a plotter TACC is a guy who stands with the clear board and like makes notations on it. I didn't realize that that was an entire duty assignment unto itself. I thought that it was just appearing with AVN controller operator as part of their duties. But obviously that's not true. Because it was said that Oswald was good at plotting on the board. So he's a plotter here all the way up until April 12th of 58. Oswald's, let me see, just getting back to Atsugi from the Philippines. Then we have, let me see, looks like Dejanovic is in America the rest of the time. And then he goes inactive September 5th, 59, just a couple weeks before Oswald. Remember, Oswald was supposed to get out in September 59. So this is kind of funny. So Oswald originally is supposed to get out September 59. I don't know what the relevance of September 59 is. But he screwed up and went to the brig a bunch of times and had to have, I think, 45 days taken off of his calendar, because you don't get paid while you're in the brig, right? So the 45 days would have put him into November, and then his final clearance date. See, his final clearance date changed a bunch of times. He joined in October. It should have been October. But then it gets changed to December minus the 45 days, right? So he should have been out around that time. But the problem with the 45 days is maybe that's why they had to rush him through on some sort of BS discharge. Because the 45 days in the brig screwed up the whole thing. So they had to let him out early. Because there's no other reason. Why couldn't he wait 3 months? There's no fucking reason for it. There's no reason for it at all. He could have put in for leave and cashed out the rest of his remaining like sick pay and all that stuff. And he didn't do that. Instead, he decided to go this route. But he applied for the Albert Schweitzer School back in March of 59. At the exact same time that, Lee Oswald is alleged to have gotten out by Gorski. Right? Actually, I found other documents that said that Lee Oswald got out of the Marines in July. I can't fit that into the timeline either, but remember, we got the statement from Robert Oswald, said his brother came and stayed with him for a couple months before leaving in Fort Worth, before going to New Orleans, before going to Moscow. So we still have, it's all these contradictions in the schedule we're trying to figure out here. But Owen Dejanovic seems like pretty uneventful until years later he becomes a football player, right? So that's pretty exciting. The other people we have schedules on are Ogg and Heindel, but those guys aren't really relevant to what we're talking about today. So let me see if there's anything relevant before we wrap up on Kerry Thornley and get out of here. So Kerry Thornley is still getting training, 19th of June, 60. He's still a training assistant till July of 60. He's back working at MACS 3, which is Santa Ana, which is a transitional squad. And then you have, he's September 20th of 60, a year almost to the date. He is out of the Marines. So what did he do in the Marines? He didn't do just 4 years. He did 4.5 years. And the only conflict he had with his high school was during his senior year, right? And he probably didn't have a lot of courses. They probably made some exemptions for him and probably incorporated some of his military time into his graduation credits. So the only conflict with Kerry Thornley is that last period of his senior year. And obviously they're willing to work with him because he's such a kiss-ass straight-A student. So, but why did he lie about it? Why did Kerry Thornley lie about it? Because he was downplaying his training. He was downplaying everything about his time in the Marines. And I didn't even get to, and I was going to talk about today, his 50-page affidavit. And I did a whole show on this before, but we're going to have to redo it because this is super important, and now it's coming back into play that Kerry Thornley is a fucking liar and lied about everything. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do another show, and we're going to talk about some of the other stuff in Oswald's background that I've been coming across, and some of the other Margaret Oswalds that Garrison was looking into. So that's going to wrap it up for me today, guys. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll see you then.